Hey everyone, welcome to the video. Going my cheat sheet for today's early and later main slate for today on DraftKings. Before we continue though, if you could leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on my new videos, I really appreciate that. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. And if you'd like access to my entire MLB sheet and my Slack chat, the link is in the description below for my Patreon. Now I'm going to kind of go over these guys a little bit quicker than usual because I'm going to do my two cheat sheets for both slates on this video, so I don't want it to be 30 minutes long. So let's just get into the picks. So for pitcher, I got Steven Strasburg versus the Cincinnati Reds. Now, I don't love the pitching on this slate. I think this is more of a bat slate. We got some really good options. We have the Yankees, the Coors Field game, and then we have the Astros as well. So I'm really going to be prioritizing bats, but I don't mind Strasburg at 10,600. I mean, it's not my favorite matchup in the world, but it's not my least favorite matchup either. Cincinnati does kind of struggle with right-handed pitching. I mean, they got some decent lefties on there, and then got the Punisher, who's just been going bonkers ever since he got called out the past 13, 14 games. And then we got Votto, Van Meter, Winker, but it's Steven Strasburg. He's got a 30% strikeout rate, and I do think he can win this matchup here. And they got Wade Miley at 9,400 versus the White Sox. Now, I think he's a little bit overpriced, but I think he's a really safe play going up against the White Sox, who are not the best team in the world versus lefties. Now, I do prefer righties versus them, but he's a massive favorite going into this game. The Astros are implied 7 runs versus Ross Detweiler. So I do think Wade Miley is a safe bet for about 20 points as long as he can pitch well enough to get that win, which I think he should be able to do. And then my favorite pitcher on this slate, just based off of price, is Tyler Beede. I'm never actually sure how to say his name. But he's only 5,600 going against the Athletics. Now he's better versus righties. He's going to see a lot of righties in this lineup. He's got a 21% strikeout rate. He's just a little bit too cheap, and it's going to be a good park for pitching too, so he makes a lot of sense. Then a catcher, we have Gary Sanchez at 4K versus Dylan Bundy. Gary Sanchez has been amazing versus the Orioles pitching this season, as a lot of guys are, and especially versus righties. And Dylan Bundy, while he has a higher strikeout rate to righties, he gives up a lot more power. I shouldn't say a lot more, but he gives up more power to righties. And it's just not the best matchup in the world versus the Yankees. So I do like Gary Sanchez and a bad bullpen for the Orioles as well. Then Mitch Garver, 5,100. He's extremely expensive, but he's been absolutely elite versus left-handed pitching this season. Gio Gonzalez is worse versus righties, so Mitch makes a lot of sense if you can afford him. Then Wellington Castillo at 2,500. He's just a cheap righty versus Wade Miley. I don't love the matchup, but he is cheap. Then at first base, we have C.J. Cron at 3,800 versus Gio Gonzalez. C.J. Cron's been amazing versus lefties this season. He's a guy who play a lot versus lefties. He's only 3,800. He should be hitting 5th or 6th in the order. So I do like C.J. Cron at that price tag. Christian Walker, if you want to spend all the way up, versus Kyle Freeland. Kyle Freeland is a dumpster fire to right-handed bats. He's not that good versus lefties either, but really want the righties here, and we're in Coors Field, so do like the D-backs today versus Freeland. Then Yuli Gurriel, 5K, just actually I was going to say cheap, but he's not cheap at all. But he's just an Astros bat versus Detweiler. I do like the Astros a lot, and they should go maybe a tad bit overlooked on this slate, considering we have Yankees and Coors Field, who are a little bit less expensive than these guys, but I do think they're in a fantastic spot. And I believe they have the highest run total on the entire slate, too. Might be wrong about that, but I think it's at 6.8 as of right now. And then at second base, we have Jose Altuve versus Detweiler. I know he's really expensive, but he's been one of the best players in the league versus left-handed pitching this season. Very high ISO, very high WRC+, so I like him a lot. Then Ketel Marte, 5,400 versus Kyle Freeland. He's been really good versus lefties this season. Kyle Freeland is not a good pitcher, especially to righties, so he makes a lot of sense. As well as his buddy Eduardo Escobar on the same team at 5,500. He's been very, very good versus left-handed pitching, so I like using Escobar. And at third base, Nolan Arenado at only 4,700. Now they get some matchup versus Robbie Ray, who's a pretty good pitcher, good strikeout rate, but Arenado has had success versus him in Coors Field before, and Coors Field can really knock down the talent of a pitcher, so I do like taking Arenado at this reduced price tag. Escobar we already talked about. Alex Bregman has been elite versus lefties this season, and Detweiler is nothing to be scared about. Now, I don't have a lot of expensive bats listed, but if I'm planning on using Beede, I can afford all these expensive bats. And then at shortstop, we have Trevor Story at 5,500 again. He's had some success versus Robbie Ray. especially in cores, so I don't mind using him. He's just really expensive. And if I had to pick between the two of Arenado and Story, I am siding with Arenado versus the lefty. Then we got Bo Bichette at 4,900. They have one of the higher implied run totals of the slate versus Kobe Allard. And Bo Bichette's been awesome. You guys all should know who he is by now. He's got called up, not just called up, but recently called up, and he's been absolutely on fire. And I actually kind of forgot to add that Blue Jays stack to my top stacks, so we're gonna add that there. Then Didi Gregorius at 4,100, cheap lefty versus Dylan Bundy. The strikeout rate comes down a lot versus lefties, so I do like Didi there at that price tag. He's a cheap part of that Yankee stack. Then in the high-end outfield, we have Ketel Marte at 5,400 versus Kyle Freeland. We already talked about him. George Springer versus the lefty. George Springer's a lead versus lefty. Should be leading off. Tim LeCastro at 4,800. Decently cheap righty versus Kyle Freeland, and I imagine he's going to be leading off, so I do like that a lot. And then in the mid-range outfield, we got Adam Jones, cheap righty versus the lefty Kyle Freeland and Coors Field. Aaron Judge at 4,700 versus Dylan Bundy. Just more power to righties when it comes to for Dylan Bundy. And then Austin Meadows at 4,600. I don't really love this spot, but he kind of fit the build here. 4,600 versus Cal Quantrill, who struggles versus lefties, and Austin Meadows pretty good versus righties. So I thought he made some sense. And then I wouldn't go out of my way to play Austin Meadows, but if you fit your lineup, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. And then in the value outfield, we have Ian Desmond at 3,700, just very, very cheap versus Robbie Ray in Coors Field versus a lefty, I should say. And then Trent Grisham at 3K, just cheap lefty versus Cal Gibson. Then my top stacks are going to be Beatty at 5,600, Gary Sanchez at 4K, and then Arenado at 4,700. And the top stacks for me are the Coors game, so Rockies and Diamondbacks. I would prefer the Diamondbacks though, because they're going up against a much worse pitcher. The Yankees, the Astros, and then the Blue Jays. So now let's get into the cheat sheet for the later main slate. So at pitching, we got Clayton Kershaw at 11,800 versus the Marlins. Now Clayton Kershaw has been pretty good this season, and going up against a Marlins team who absolutely sucks versus lefties. Now they strike out a little bit less versus lefties, but their ISO's down, their WOBA's down, their WRC plus is down, and Clayton Kershaw had an amazing game when he faced off versus Miami last time out, which I believe it was last time. So I can expect, I'm not sure if I'm going to expect the same as that game he had last time, but I think he can have a really good game versus them again. He offers us a lot of safety. Then Dylan Peters at 6,300 versus Pittsburgh. Now, is he the best pitcher? No, but he has hit value a few times in the his recent games. And he's just a cheap lefty versus Pittsburgh. We like to use lefties versus Pittsburgh. He's got a decent enough strikeout upside at 20%. And yeah, Pittsburgh's not really good versus lefties. They got one of the lower WRC pluses, ISOs, WOBOs, and just overall bad numbers versus lefties. Then Marco Gonzalez at 8,700. He had a pretty good game out last time versus Detroit. They lost Castellanos, which is good because he's one of their most dangerous righties. So it's really just a pretty bad lineup, and I think Gonzalez has... He doesn't have the upside Kershaw does, but I do think he's decently safe enough, and he should be able to get the win as Detroit's going to throw out Edwin Jackson on the mound. So as you're going to see, I'm going to like a lot of the Mariners today. So let's get to the catcher position. We got Omar Narvaez at 4,200 versus Edwin Jackson. Now, I know Edwin Jackson had a pretty good game out versus the Royals last time out, but hey, it happens. It's baseball, but I don't think it's going to happen again. I think Edwin Jackson goes back to sucking. The Detroit bullpen sucks, so I think the Mariners should eat, and they're all pretty cheap, so shouldn't have any problem full stacking this if you want to. And then Wilson Ramos, 4,500 versus the lefty Dallas Keuchel. Keuchel got absolutely murdered the last time I played him against the Miami Marlins. So, and he is susceptible to righty power this season, so I don't mind using Ramos. He's pretty good versus lefties, doesn't strike out a lot at all. And Tyler Flowers versus the lefty Steven Matz. I do like the Braves offense a lot versus Matz. And then first base, we have Daniel Vogelbach at 4,300 versus Edwin Jackson. Edwin Jackson's actually a little bit worse versus righties this season, but it doesn't mean he's any good versus lefties either, so I do like the matchup for Daniel Vogelbach. Ryan O'Hearn at 3K. Dakota Hudson's a good pitcher. No, I shouldn't say he's a good pitcher, but he's a really good pitcher to righties. And then when it comes to the lefties, he's much worse. He's kind of like Anthony Descalfani. Same kind of splits there, where he's really tough on the righties and gives it a little bit up to lefties. So I don't mind using O'Hearn as a cheap one-off for lefty power. Maybe get a cheap home run. And then Pete Alonso versus, I believe it's Dallas Keuchel, right? Or Yeah, it's Dallas Keuchel. Sorry, the matchup thing didn't show up. I think his name's Peter Alonso in there, so I just gotta fix that. But yeah, he's just got a lot of power versus lefties and righties. I know he's really expensive, and I do prefer going with Vogelbach. But if you want to use Alonso, I wouldn't mind that at all. And then second base, Ozzy Albies at 5,200 versus Steven Matz. I mean, it's just a pretty good matchup for. Gotta fix that. I think the function thing's down. Yeah, versus Ozzy Albies versus Steven Matz. Albies is really good versus left-handed pitching. Steven Matz gives up quite a bit of hard contact and power to righties. And Ozzy Albies, I keep saying his name wrong. Albies is he's kind of a streaky guy. When he's hot, you want to ride that streak, and he's been pretty hot recently. And I love this Braves offense, and if I'm going to be full stacking the Braves, I would not leave Ozzy off your full stacks. He's really expensive though, but I do think he is worth it. And Tommy Edman at 4,200 versus Brad Keller. Is it my favorite matchup in the world? No, but Keller is a low strikeout guy. Edman's been pretty good versus righties this season. He should be hitting around second, so I do like that at that price point. Then Max Muncy, 5,100. The Dodgers went absolutely nuts last night versus the Marlins in Miami. Last time I looked, they had 15 runs. They might have scored more than that, but Hernandez is not the best pitcher in the world. I know he's had a couple good games, but I don't think this is the matchup for him versus Muncy and the rest of the Dodgers lefties. And then at third base, we have Josh Donaldson at 4,700 versus Steven Matz. Now, I gotta fix this. It's a double slate, so all the matchups kind of got a little bit lost there. Let me fix this. But yeah, in the meantime, Josh Donaldson, I think I was talking about him. I like all the righties versus Steven Matz. He gives up the power to righties, and I do think the Braves are one of the better stacks on the slate. Then Tommy Edman, we already talked about. Kyle Seager at 4K. I think he's going to be really popular, and I would probably look for him to play him in cash games, either him or Donaldson. Just Edwin Jackson, he's a trash kid on the mound, so I want to get all the guys I can versus him. Then at shortstop, we have J.P. Crawford at 3,800 versus Edwin Jackson. Again, it's going to be more Mariners. I know it sounds like a broken record, but I want all the Mariners versus Edwin Jackson. They're fairly priced, and they just have the best matchup on the entire board. And they're not terrible players. I know they're the guys we like to pick on with good pitchers, but Edwin Jackson, anyone can hit off of him. And then Corey Seager, 4,100, just a cheaper lefty versus Hernandez. Then Gene Segura has been really good versus lefties this season. I know Cole Hamels is a pretty good pitcher, but I do like the value you get with Segura, and I can't imagine he has much ownership. And then Ronald Acuna versus Steven Matz. Acuna is elite versus lefties, and there is some stolen base upside here as well, so he's one of my favorite plays in the entire slate if you can afford him. Cody Bellinger versus Hernandez. I already said I like all the Dodgers lefties versus him, and they had a really good game last time out, so it doesn't really matter what ballpark they're in. They can hit in any ballparks. I wouldn't be too scared of Miami, and they should go a little lower owned with some of the other bats we have on this offenses we have on this slate. Then Mike Trout, he's always in play. Chris Archer has a good strikeout rate, especially versus righties, but he does give up more power to righties, and we all know Mike Trout versus right-handed pitching. He's pretty much the best player in the league. I wouldn't say he pretty much is. He is the best player in the league versus right-handed pitching. Christian Yelich does give him a run for his money, but it's Trout most of the time. So I don't mind using him. I can't imagine he has much ownership at all. Then in the mid-range outfield, we have Domingo Santana at 4,400 versus Edwin Jackson. He's actually a righty versus Jackson, and Jackson is a little bit worse versus righties. I still love all the lefties, but I don't mind going with Santana in full stacks. I imagine he's going to be one of the guys you leave out in cash games just because he's not someone I'm going out of my way to play, but if I'm doing full stacks, I like throwing him in there. Jock Peterson, 4,500, leading off versus Hernandez as a lefty. Adam Duvall, 4,200, righty with power versus Steven Matz. Then in the value outfield, we have Malik Smith at 4,200. He's going to be really popular tomorrow, but I'm doing him as core play versus Jackson. He's going to be leading off. Justin Upton at 3,800, just cheap righty power versus Chris Archer. Upton's been a lot better versus righties this season. Shohei Ohtani at 4,300 versus Chris Archer. I do think the Angels are a somewhat interesting stack because Chris Archer tends to be wild and then he can get blown up. And then Dexter Fowler, cheap lefty versus Brett Keller. And then Alex Gordon, a cheap lefty versus Dakota Hudson. And the core plays for me are Kershaw, Vogelbach, Crawford, and Malik Smith. And the top stacks for me are the Mariners, the Braves, the Dodgers, the Angels, and then the Cardinals. So anyway, guys, that's all I got for the video. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on my new videos. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. And I wish you guys the best of luck tomorrow.